release a video, and I hear word from, I was at a conference recently that every journalist in DC is like waiting to see if I'm going to sting them, and they're all
Who's
worried.
next?
Who's next? So, I mean, the journalists, the journalists are supposed to be about, the biggest. I was just thinking about this the other day. I think the biggest problem in America right now is the conventions. 15,000 journalists were in one place at one time, all aiming their microphones in one direction. Why do we need 15,000 people covering one thing? Yeah, I want to live in a country where those 15,000 journalists, many of which are frankly quite talented, state houses, city council meetings, school boards, NGOs, state senators, holding people accountable. Can you imagine if those 15,000 people were swarming around the country, actually doing journalism?
Right, because people don't realize, I mean, the power of the pen. I write for our local newspaper, and I'm sure the mayor and council are always like, oh my gosh, who's next? There's a lot of things going on in town. And you really, when you're able to write and you're able to do that, there is a certain power to it. And as you were saying before about how there's supposed to be a certain pedigree to the journalists, they have that elitist attitude. And Juan Williams on Fox exemplified that perfectly when he called Michelle Malkin just a blogger.
Yes.
And here, this is an incredibly intelligent woman who has researched her topics, who knows them from top to bottom, probably way better than Juan Williams ever could imagine knowing.
Yes.
And that's how he tried to belittle her. So always, that's the play. That's how they play the game. If you're doing something and you're embarrassing them, they're just going to switch it on you and completely belittle all of your hard efforts.
Or as Zelensky says, personalize the target. So we do videos, so seeing is believing. I don't necessarily have an affinity more to the video realm than I do to the written word. I just know that video is more effective.
Oh, sure.
I probably enjoy writing more, but I know in my heart that video it's impossible to argue with what we do. But that's why they don't talk about what we do. They talk about me,
Exactly.
because there's nothing to debate. I mean, fact. You can go into Eric Holder's poll location and obtain his ballot. That is a matter of fact that we expose. There's nothing to debate. You can talk about voter ID laws if you wish. You can talk about whether they're discriminatory, but you can't argue with the fact that his ballot is vulnerable to be given out to anyone, and that fact is manifestly damning. That fact, slices through the narrative like hot butter, and the only thing they can say is to change the subject and target me
Go after you.
personally. That's why when you Google the things we do, it's always about me and it's always about my background and what I look like and this and that, and it gets to a point where you think I'd probably be more effective if I just get off the stage and get behind the camera and not even go out there. And that's what some people choose to do.
It really is a case of going after the messenger.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Oh, always.
And for people who don't know, and I don't know how you wouldn't know, take us through the voter fraud scenario.
Right.
Because you just mentioned Eric Holder.
We, it was the beginning of this year. It was the first week of 2012, and I was thinking about, so what type of investigations we want to do this year? The election's coming up. Well, why don't they talk about dead people voting, and some tipster said, why don't you just go through the obituary sections of the newspapers, put that in an Excel, and then put an Excel of all the registered voters and see what matches up. And we found thousands of people who were both dead and registered to vote. But that wasn't, usually they end there. What we did is we actually found the polling locations of the dead people, went to them and said, do you have, John Smith, without breaking the law, because we didn't say, I am John Smith. That would have been a federal crime.
Right.
We said, do you have this person, as a journalist?
Right.
And it wasn't really to my surprise, but to many people's surprise, they handed us the ballot of the dead person. And I'm like, no, I don't want this ballot. And no, we insist, take the ballot. I'm like, I don't even have my ID. You don't need an ID. So we offer our ID. No, don't give us the ID.
IDs are bad, really bad.
They're not even allowed to do the right thing. They're not allowed.
I don't even think you can do that in New Jersey. You cannot accept voter ID. You
Right.
cannot accept ID.
You have to sign the thing in most
and then
cases.
hope that it matches.
But you can't even, so there's this brilliant visual, us refusing the illegal ballot, offering our driver's license and them like, no, it's like a crucifix to a
Yes.
vampire. It's like,
Don't
and
show us.
and that was incredibly revealing. That was New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, right?
And of course, the media, which thought I was dead and forgotten, instantly came back out again and said I'm a felon, I'm a criminal, I committed crimes. The Attorney General of New Hampshire tried to indict me,
I remember that.
criminal grand jury subpoena. And if you actually examine the tapes, you'll see that we walked a very fine line. We did not cross that line.
Cross the line.
And after that video was released, probably a couple weeks later, the Senate in New Hampshire passed a law to resolve that. And then months later, the House of Representatives in New Hampshire passed the law and overrode the governor who tried to have me arrested.
Wow.
So it's like, you're going against the government, you're going against the media, but because the video, it's video,
Right, there is no dispute.
there is nothing to debate. They can't deny there's a problem. We did this in 5 states, and in the most famous case, we did it in DC. Went into Attorney General Eric Holder's location, and we were offered his ballot.
And
That's
then,
unbelievable.
to think that nobody even knew who Eric Holder was there in DC.
Well, that's just the thing, that's the rub. Even if they did know, what are they gonna say? I had scripted 2 different scenarios. In the case that they didn't know him, we get the ballot. In the case that they did know him, our guy would simply say, oh, do you need to see my driver's license? And they'd be like, no, don't show me that. Well, you don't look, what are you saying, I don't look African American? Like, they're never gonna say.
Right.
So you effectively expose their nonsense by simply making them live up to their own book of rules.
Right, and didn't he right from there try and go into a federal building and had to show ID?
Yeah, he went to the Department of Justice, and the security guards were adamant that he show his driver's license. We also went to Vermont for juxtaposition purposes. We juxtapositioned a guy trying to order a beer, and the cops got called because we didn't have ID. We put that right next to the scene of them giving us ballots in the name of fame,
And
you
that's
know.
okay, in the name of people who they aren't.
That's okay, yeah.
And that's okay. You know, I know a lot of people try to twist the voter fraud as being racist and preventing people from voting. And my argument is that it's about protecting your vote, and why wouldn't you want your vote protected? Why should it be negated by someone who's not allowed to vote? And I think going into this election, this is really gonna be one of the biggest problems, is voter fraud.
Well, you have an attorney general who's suing the states that are trying to get a hold of their voter registries.
Exactly, Florida.
And that is the man who basically could have his vote compromised. It just shows how ridiculous it all is. And the fact that you couldn't write that in an article and have somebody investigate it, that you have to go through these extents, the extents that you do to do this, to me, is also, you know, I sometimes can't, I'm watching it, I watched it last night again, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The people who work at the polling, you know, at the voting polls, or who were taking the IDs or were in charge of it,
Right.
Or not
we're almost
taking
just like,
IDs.
hey, listen, this is what you do. You sit at that chair, and you don't accept any IDs, and you just give them the paperwork and tell them to go
Just
to
let 'em sign
point
it.
B. And that's the extent of the knowledge, or
There was one incident in
It's-
North Carolina where we did the same thing in DC, North Carolina. North Carolina, we put a bandage on our arm so we couldn't even sign. So in New Jersey, you have to sign the thing.
Right.
And
Uh-huh.
we had a bandage on our arm, and the woman was actually telling us that she could sign on our behalf. And remember, we're not the correct individual.
Right.
So,
Oh my
so
goodness.
at this point in time, like, just like in all these videos, this is unprecedented. What do I do in this situation? And we basically had determined if that were to happen, we would like back away. She like lunged at us and like tried to bring us towards the
No,
ballot.
wait, let me talk
It's
for
like-
you.
just
This
put an
is-
X here.
This is the problem with Western civilization, that you get a cop called on you if you don't have an ID to get a beer, but you will be forced to sign the documents obtaining the most powerful attorney general in the country to get his ballot. It's like, and that honestly, people say, how do you persuade, culturally, how do you get people to change their minds? That's how you do it.
Right, you
Through
have to
film,
show.
through filmmaking, through visual expose. No one with common sense can look at those two scenarios and say that's okay. The only thing they can do is say O'Keefe is racist.
Right, that's about it.
That'll work. But that'll only work to a certain extent because it's been a couple years now, and they can only do that so many times.
Mhm.
You look at our results and the legislation that has been passed that I didn't even lobby anyone. I didn't go to these states and say I want this passed.
Exactly.
Where
You
people
you
do
just
that,
showed it.
people do that for a living and they don't win.
Mhm.
People lobby government for a living, they don't get their things passed. I don't lobby anyone and things pass, because that's the power of the truth.
Right,
Mhm.
and you struck a chord. And
Yeah.
in North Carolina, isn't it true? Didn't you find like 30,000 voters who were?
Well, North Carolina, there we found a couple dead people. We went in and said like we had a couple dead names, but it turns out that another group went after our investigation, followed up. I think it's called like the Voter Integrity Project, and
Mhm.
they found 30,000 dead
Gosh.
people.
So
30,000.
it's inspired other people to do stuff. 30,000
Yeah.
and Obama won there by 14,000.
Yes, and in Minnesota, we did another one that was where Senator Franken won by, I think, a
3
few
votes.
hundred votes,
Right.
360 something or something like that.
Well, I think then
Yeah.
we should, just being politically correct here, I think then we should have a dead registry vote, legal vote. The mo-
Legal.
Legal, yeah, so all the dead people in every state can go ahead and vote.
Okay, thanks, Eddie.
No problem. Well, we have so many.
Right. I mean, only if
Franken
they're
used them,
voting
Obama
or-
used them.
Oh, yeah, but it's just insane. But you've also changed some things going on at NPR. We started
Yes,
to talk
we
about that
talked about
before.
that, yeah.
Because that's
So
another
that
big
was
deal.
that was like another example of the catch a journalist thing. We wanted to go directly after the media. Juan Williams was fired by was it NPR?
It was NPR, yeah.
He was fired by NPR. He started working at Fox.
Yes, Fox was kind enough to hire him.
Kind enough to hire him. And I guess I had some all these things, a swirl of ideas that sort of come together like the perfect storm. There was one idea where I wanted to go, I had this sort of fictitious organization that I had sort of sitting on the internet for an investigation. It was called the Muslim Education Action Center. And I was going to use that to investigate a different thing. And my one friend was just so upset about the Muslim Brotherhood. And then my other friend was upset about Juan Williams. So we swirled them all together, and then I knew that I wanted to investigate NPR. This was an organization that receives tens of millions of dollars from the federal government. It is a media corporation, which you know how I feel about those. And it's
And
government
it's
funded.
tax-funded.
Taxpayer funded.
No, we could say government, but I always like to switch out and say it's
Tax-
taxpayer funded.
fair
I
enough,
know,
yes.
I try to bring it back home so people
Words,
understand
yes.
that it's you who are paying for this.
So what do we do? Well, we decided to let's see what Walensky says in their self-interest. Well, their weakness is they solicit donations from the government. They also solicit. They're also an organization that solicits donations. So we decided to donate to them on behalf of the politically correct Muslim Brotherhood, and we had our website that said, we want to spread Sharia law across the United States. We
Wow.
we got these two guys who one of them wore a long beard, and tanned his skin. He got very into the role. And another guy who posed as a North African Muslim. It was my African American friend who did an investigation in the teachers' unions here in New Jersey, Sean Adelaide. And we rented a stretch limo, not just a little town car, an actual
Yeah.
limo. And we chose one of the priciest restaurants in